The execution that shook the stars. The execution was meant to be a warning. Across the vast territories of the Galactic Empire, the broadcast played on every screen. It showed a tall, gaunt alien judge standing before a bound woman, Dr. Adrian Voss. Her face was bruised, her once pristine lab coat tattered. She was human, a scientist accused of conspiring against the Empire. The judge's voice echoed through the square of HFY Prime, the Empire's central world. Adrian Voss, you have been found guilty of sedition and treason. Your research into restricted knowledge and your alleged ties to rebel forces make you an enemy of the Empire. The punishment is death. Adrian stood unbroken, even with the weight of the noose around her neck. Her gaze was defiant. She had spent years working to bridge understanding between species, to find common ground where the Empire had only seen subjects to rule. Her work had been deemed dangerous. In the end, the truth mattered little to the rulers of the galaxy. A moment later, the platform beneath her dropped. Millions watched, some in horror, some in silent approval. The Empire believed it had silenced another threat. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The general's grief. Across the stars, light years away from HFY Prime, General Adrian Voss stood frozen before the transmission screen in his personal quarters. The room, usually filled with tactical displays and holomaps, now felt suffocatingly small. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. His fingers curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. He had thought the worst of war had hardened him. He had witnessed planetary bombardments, seen entire civilizations crumble under the might of the Empire. He had even given the orders himself. But nothing had prepared him for this. The love of his life, his wife, hanged like a common criminal. Adrian had been on the front lines when Adrian was taken. He had trusted the system. He had sent messages, pulled every favor, demanded an explanation. The Empire had given him nothing. And now, without warning, she was gone. A chime echoed in his quarters. His lieutenant, Commander Rin Salas, stepped inside hesitantly. She was a hardened veteran, her reptilian eyes cold and calculating, but even she looked uneasy. "General," she began, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "I just received the news. I don't know what to say." Adrian's voice, when it came, was hollow. "You knew, didn't you?" Rin hesitated. "I suspected. The High Command kept it from you. They feared your reaction." Adrian laughed, a bitter, empty sound. They feared his reaction. Good. He turned away from her, staring at the now-frozen screen, where Alara's lifeless body still hung. The anger inside him wasn't a flame. It was an inferno. For years, he had fought for the Empire, crushed its enemies, and led its armies. He had been their hammer, their executioner. And yet, when the woman he loved needed him the most, they had discarded her like she was nothing. "Prepare my resignation," Adrian said, his voice dangerously calm. Rin's eyes widened. "Sir," I said, "prepare my resignation." She stiffened. "And if High Command refuses to accept it?" Adrian finally turned to her. There was no grief left in his eyes, only cold, ruthless determination. "Then we burn them to the ground." The Empire's fatal mistake. Word spread quickly. General Voss had vanished. The Empire assumed he was mourning, retreating from the battlefield to grieve in silence. What they did not realize, what they had failed to anticipate, was that Adrian was not a man who suffered in silence. He was a man of action, a man of vengeance. And now, he was coming for them. The storm gathers. The Empire had created a monster. For years, General Adrian Voss had been the sharpest blade in their arsenal, a tactician who turned entire wars with a single maneuver. He had burned worlds at their command, crushed rebellions before they could take root, and built his name into something whispered in fear. And now, that legend had turned against them. Adrian had disappeared from the Empire's reach, but he was far from idle. He was preparing for war. A general without a nation. On the desolate moon of Cathis, deep within a ruined war bunker, a small gathering had assembled. Scoundrels, ex-imperial officers, mercenaries, and alien warlords, the unwanted and the betrayed. Some had once served the Empire, only to be discarded when they were no longer useful. Others had fought against it for years, surviving through cunning and sheer hatred. Now, they all sat in silence as Adrian Voss took his place before them. He had changed. The polished general's uniform was gone, replaced by battle-scarred armor stripped of insignias. His face, once composed and unreadable, was now etched with something raw and dangerous. "I did not call you here for hope," Adrian began, his voice like steel. "The Empire does not fear hope. It fears men like me, men who know their playbook, men who have led their armies, stood in their war rooms, and seen the gears of their machine turning." He let his words settle before continuing. "They took everything from me. My wife, my loyalty, my patience." His fists tightened at his sides. "And now, I will take everything from them." The room remained still, eyes locked on him. Then, an alien warlord, Kairos of the Red Talons, leaned forward, his cybernetic eye glinting. "You speak of war, human. But war against the Empire is suicide." Adrian met his gaze without flinching. "A war of soldiers versus the Empire's armies? Yes. Suicide." He gestured to a hollow map behind him, displaying a vast network of trade routes, fuel depots, and logistics hubs. "But I do not plan to fight them like an enemy. I plan to fight them like a disease." A murmur rippled through the room. Adrian stepped closer. "The Empire is built on order. It survives not because it is strong, but because it is predictable. Every fleet deployment, every supply chain, every planetary garrison. I know them all." He pointed at the map, red marks appearing over critical targets. "We will cut their supply lines, destroy their communications, assassinate their commanders. We will force their citizens to question their rule by exposing their corruption." And when the Empire realizes what's happening, Adrian let out a cold breath. It will already be too late. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then, Rin Salas, his former second-in-command, smirked. "Well, I suppose I've followed you through worse plans." Kairos bared his fangs in a grin. "It seems the Phantom General still has fangs after all." One by one, voices joined in agreement. A war council was born, and the first blow was about to be struck. The first strike. 2 weeks later, the Empire supply station on Etheris 7 went dark. No alarms were sounded. No distress calls were sent. But when Imperial reinforcements arrived, they found only wreckage. Ships were dismantled. Fuel depots burned. Every high-ranking officer executed and left as a message. The emblem of the Empire slashed across their chests. And on every surviving console, a single transmission looped. "You took one life. I will take an empire." Signed, General Adrian Voss. The Empire's panic. High Command had been caught off guard. They had assumed Adrian's grief would make him reckless, that he would rush in with a suicidal attack. Instead, he had disappeared, becoming a ghost that bled them dry from the shadows. Admiral Kelnvaros, a high-ranking strategist of the Empire, scowled as he paced before a war table in the Imperial Palace. The reports were damning. 5 strategic fuel stations destroyed. Supply convoys hijacked. Imperial governors assassinated in their own homes. "He's not fighting a rebellion," Varos growled, slamming his fist onto the table. "He's waging a war of extinction." The Emperor, a cold and calculating ruler, remained silent for a moment before speaking. "Then we must remind him who he defies." A single order was given. "Find Adrian Voss, crush him, and make the galaxy watch." But the Empire had made a fatal mistake. They still believed this was his war alone, the wrath of a husband. The Empire had underestimated him. They had thought Adrian Voss would break under grief, that he would throw himself into reckless vengeance and be swiftly crushed. Instead, he had turned their own strategies against them. Instead, he had become their nightmare. The tides of war. Aboard the Shadow Fawn, Adrian Voss stood before a war table surrounded by his most trusted commanders. The rebellion was no longer just a string of well-placed strikes. It had become a full-scale war. Rin Salas tapped a hollow display, bringing up a list of Imperial worlds on the brink of collapse. "Luther's moon is fully ours. The governor tried to flee but was caught and executed by his own people. Same with the outpost on Gyros 7. Kairos of the Red Talons let out a low chuckle. The Empire bleeds, General. Their worlds turn against them faster than they can react. Adrian studied the map in silence. The last few months had been calculated destruction. Every time the Empire had prepared a counterattack, they had found themselves outmaneuvered and crippled before they could act. They will retaliate soon, Adrian said. The Emperor will not tolerate this much damage without answering with overwhelming force. Rin nodded. We intercepted transmissions. They're rallying under Lord Commander Tardos. He's moving an armada to retake key systems. Kairos sneered. Let them come. We've crushed every force they've sent. Adrian shook his head. Tardos isn't like Varos. He won't spread himself thin. He'll come straight for the heart of this rebellion. He looked up, his eyes like cold steel. We need to strike first. The assassination of the Imperial warlords. The Imperial High Command had become paranoid. With Admiral Varos dead and their fleets in disarray, the remaining generals and governors had retreated to a fortified citadel on Zyphar Prime, hoping to regroup and form strategy. It was a mistake. Adrian had already planned his next move. Under the cover of a manufactured uprising, his elite strike team infiltrated the fortress. They were ghosts in the dark, cutting through defenses with ruthless precision. The warlords were in their strategy chamber when the doors burst open. Adrian walked in, his rifle smoking, his presence alone sending waves of terror through the room. General Voss, one of them stammered, stepping back. You. A single shot cut him down. The others tried to flee. Some begged for their lives. None survived. Within minutes, every Imperial leader inside the citadel was dead. As Adrian stood over their bodies, he activated a communicator. Broadcast a message, he ordered. Across the Empire, every screen flickered to life, displaying the bloodied corpses of their leaders. And then, Adrian's voice rang out. You took one life. Now I take your future. The galaxy erupted into chaos. The Empire's fear. In the Imperial Palace, the Emperor sat in silence, watching the broadcast. His advisors were in a panic, shouting over one another, demanding a response. But the Emperor did not move. Only his fingers, curled against the armrest of his throne, betrayed his fury. Lord Commander Tardos stepped forward. This has gone too far. The Emperor exhaled slowly. You're right. He turned to Tardos, his voice deathly calm. Burn everything. It was an order that meant only one thing. No more trying to reclaim planets. No more governance. Just destruction. Entire cities, entire species. If they were suspected of aiding Adrian Voss, they would be erased from existence. It was the last desperate act of a dying regime, and it would be their undoing. The war becomes personal. On the Shadow Fawn, Adrian stood before his commanders, his jaw clenched as the reports came in. The Empire had begun its scorched earth campaign. Civilian populations were being wiped out in retaliation. Entire cities were bombed into rubble. They were no longer trying to win. They were trying to make him suffer. Adrian's fists tightened. His war had always been strategic, precise. But now it was personal. He turned to his forces. His voice was steady, but beneath it was a quiet rage that could tear worlds apart. They think they can break us. He looked around the room, meeting every gaze. They think they can burn us into submission. He stepped forward. They're wrong. He tapped the holomap, pulling up the final target. The Imperial Throne World. Zyphar Prime. The heart of the Empire. The place where they had executed Alara. His voice was cold, final. We end this. We take the throne. We burn the Empire to the ground. His commanders did not cheer. They did not need to. The fall of an empire. The final battle had begun. The Galactic Empire had ruled for centuries, unchallenged and absolute. But now, its throne world burned. Zyphar Prime, the heart of Imperial power, was under siege. Adrian Voss had come, not as a soldier of the Empire, not as a grieving husband, but as its executioner. The invasion begins. From the bridge of the Shadow Fawn, Adrian Voss watched as his fleet tore through Imperial defenses. The once impenetrable planetary shield flickered and failed, overwhelmed by precision strikes and sabotage. Ground forces move in. Adrian ordered, his voice like iron. Dropships streaked through the skies, deploying thousands of battle-hardened troops. Former Imperials, rebels, mercenaries, all united under one purpose: to end the Empire. Rin Salas's voice crackled through the comms. Resistance is heavier than expected. The Imperial Guard is making a last stand at the palace. Adrian's grip tightened on the command console. Good. That was where he needed to be. The last line of defense. The Imperial Palace, once a symbol of eternal power, was now a fortress under siege. The massive gates, once thought unbreachable, lay in ruins. Smoke filled the air as Adrian and his elite strike team pushed forward through the shattered halls. Blaster fire tore through the corridors. Imperial soldiers fought with desperate fury, but it was clear they were already dead. Adrian moved like a force of nature, cutting down every soldier in his path. And then, at the throne room doors, Lord Commander Tarthos awaited him. Tarthos was a monster in human form, towering, armored, and wielding a blade of pure plasma. He pointed it at Adrian. You should have died with her. Adrian's expression did not change. You first. The duel was ferocious. Tarthos was fast, but Adrian was faster. He dodged, countered, and struck with ruthless precision. Blades clashed, sparks flew, and in the end, Adrian's blade pierced Tarthos's heart. The Lord Commander staggered, gasping, before crumpling to the floor. The last true warrior of the Empire was dead, and the throne room doors stood open. The end of the Emperor. Inside, the Emperor sat upon his throne, watching Adrian with cold, unblinking eyes. You think killing me will change anything? The Emperor said. Adrian stepped forward, his weapon raised. No. He pulled the trigger. A single shot. The Emperor slumped, his lifeless body sliding from the throne. No final words. No dramatic end. Just silence. Adrian turned and activated his communicator. The Empire is finished, he said. Zyphar Prime belongs to us. Across the galaxy, the message spread. The war was over. The Emperor was dead. The Galactic Empire had fallen. The price of vengeance. The throne room was empty now, save for Adrian. For the first time since Alara's death, he was alone. He had done what he set out to do. He had destroyed the Empire. But Alara was still gone. No victory could bring her back. Rin's voice came through his communicator. Adrian, it's over. He exhaled slowly. Was it? He had spent so long being consumed by war that he didn't know what came next. But as he stepped away from the throne, he realized something. He had spent his life following orders. Now, for the first time, he was finally free, and the galaxy would never be the same again.